back into regular session, and do we have a motion? Yes, please, Dr. Kelly.
Chairman Keith, I move that the board accept our draft opinion for notice of potential violation 2014-2, subject to the revisions that we discussed during deliberative session, which will be included into a final draft. And accepting this opinion, including any potential amendments it might make to our original finding.
Second.
Okay, any opposed? Carries. So we can move on to the next item, and Glenda, I'll either sign it next week, or you tell me when you're ready
Okay.
to sign.
Sure, I can make the corrections this week and I can get it to Lisa.
Yeah.
Okay,
Linda, thank you.
Yeah, thank
That
you.
was awesome. It was
Absolutely.
amazing. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Amy usually writes this stuff, and it's awful. It's just-
It's a total disaster.
It's rife with problems.
Even the walls misunderstood.
So we're
Well, usually
moving.
I'm trying to accommodate what kind of things you want to put in the letter. It just becomes Kantian and completely disaster.
So this will actually help, because we're moving to 6B, now that we're finished with 6A.
I thought we were gonna reorg.
We did, I said after the end of 6B.
Oh,
I don't care if we do it now or later.
Oh, let's do it
do it now.
Happy to join.
All right.
Unless you want to hang on to
No,
the last.
Yeah, I think
That's-
I will speak to that at this point. You know, they want to hold the elections, and I held off on the elections because this gentleman, David, wasn't here last week, and he had an excused absence. So and my term is up this year in October, and not knowing what the new mayor is going to do, it'd be best if I were to step down as chair, and so
How long have you been chair? I can't
be
remember.
just short of 2 years because
2 years?
he abdicated in the middle of his.
In the middle, without any warning. Yeah, no, he's saying that that's just the way it's done.
Just like the Pope. You know.
Or the governor.
Benedict.
Or the governor.
So,
that's right.
so I guess the floor is open for nomination for chair and vice chair.
Have we done any nominations already, or is it?
No, there's been no nominations. Yes, Dr. Kelly.
Chair Keith, I nominate David Nesbitt for chair.
Okay. Do we have a nomination for vice chair?
I'll
Or do you decline or accept the nomination?
accept it.
Okay.
Who did we talk? We talked about you being the vice
I
chair.
said I would do it if
Yeah.
one of these guys didn't want to do it. I mean, it's always nice to get fresh blood into it, but if,
Yeah.
if these guys felt like it was a little bit too much too soon, then I was happy to be vice chair.
I know what you've had participation on the board before, haven't you? Were you ever vice chair or chair?
I wasn't, and I don't have any burning desire to be, so I'm happy.
Are you both wanting to hang out for a little bit before you get nominated
I
to be
would.
vice chair?
I think so.
Would you prefer? Okay, all right. Then I would nominate Terry Kelly for vice chair,
Okay, so it's.
unless you would like to move down one step.
No, actually, it would be nice to just
I
attend the
thought so.
meeting.
That's what I figured.
Right, Dr. Kelly?
No, I'm regretting. I'm already thinking I gotta prepare now.
That's what I was gonna say. Wait, the meetings you show to, you realize you're the only one that's read this stuff before.
I know.
Lazy.
I know. Okay,
So-
so I nominate Terry Kelly for
Okay,
vice chair.
it's,
Do you
what's
accept it
that?
tonight? Do you have to?
Oh,
accept
you
it?
need to do that as well?
But I can-
Chairmanship.
Okay. All right, so we're ignoring that, and we're moving on with Terry Kelly being the vice chair.
So it's been moved. Do we have any other nominations? Hearing none. One of you call the question?
I'll call the question.
Okay, it's been moved for David Nesbitt to be chair and Chair Emeritus, and here Dr. Kelly to
That's
be,
here, Professor.
okay, to be vice chair.
Is it a silent?
Any
pitch, or
objection?
is it like a high pitch? Hair?
Well, it sort of depends on where you are. The more southern you go.
Okay, hearing no objections, the nominations they are now elected.
Can I
It's
administer
hard.
this
It's
out?
real hard, yeah.
So we have an oath of office that we need to administer.
Really?
Yes.
I'm so begrudging.
LA.
These folks did it last week. Yeah, it was last week.
Okay, David, if you could stand and,
Really?
yes.
I don't remember Keith doing this.
He did it. He did it in the office, and these guys did it last week.
Alright.
And repeat, raise your right hand, repeat after me. I solemnly swear
I, David Nesbitt, solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States,
for the Board of Ethics, Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Alaska,
Constitution of the State of Alaska,
and the Charter of Anchorage,
and the Charter of the Municipality of Anchorage,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties.
and that I will faithfully perform the duties of the Board of Ethics to my best of my ability.
Thank you.
David, they swore in everybody last week.
Did they really?
Yeah, because we stumbled upon this requirement for another
Yeah.
meeting that certain boards had to be sworn in, and you're
Wow.
one of them.
Okay.
And David, if I can just give this to you.
Can
this
you
is,
notarize this for me?
I am going to.
Okay.
This is
The one I
the
see.
orientation package we went over last week.
Oh, very good. I
And
need
if
this.
you could fill out your present economic interest form and this information form before the meeting's over, I will update you.
So would you like?
Well,
You're the
filling
one
out-
that said we by 15th of the of annually.
Was that mine?
That was
Really?
part of your
Okay.
decision.
All right.
So would you like me to?
Oh,
Would you like to take over chairman as of the next meeting, or
let's
do
have,
it?
let's have the
right now?
ceremonial passing of the gavel.
But not the name card. No. All right. Very well.
And she likes you to gavel every time you start a meeting.
Well, we've already started this meeting.
Gavel training.
While we're on the record, that Kathleen and I joined halfway through this meeting. Right?
Oh, did
That
we not
was
do
Lisa
that?
was supposed to announce that, but we were
We
off the
talked
record
about
at that
that,
time.
yeah.
So
I actually wrote it down, so I'll put it in the official record. Bill came in at 11:58 and Kathleen at 12 p.m.
oh, good lord. So, Mr. Chair, we're on 6B.
Did I spell chair right?
Don't worry about it. The buzz sounds great.
Are we on the?
Unfinished business number 6B. And we're doing well on time.
And
Yes.
this, I think, was intended to be sort of a work session, because we've been trying
Right, that
to.
was not the last meeting, so please help.
Yeah, I think that this was intended to be a work session, because these have been, keep floating around, and we know they need to be, some type of additional work needs to be done in terms of the code or the process of looking at investigation, at these notices of potential violation. And so we called a work session so that it would in fact get done. 'Cause
And what's good about it is that both Bill and Kathleen are here, so that you'll have a chance to see the procedures right up front. We just, when Dr. Kelly and I were doing this, we just kind of had to stumble our way through and look at the code and kind of figure our way through. So Dr.
Yeah,
Kelly
we'd
went
only
through
done-
and
I
did
think
it.
I've only
Right?
done like one or two of these with Ray Kimura before he left, and so it was sort of like, what do we do with it? So what we have here are three documents. The first document is envisioned as sort of an internal document for the Board of Ethics, sort of like, reminding us and guiding us on how the investigation is conducted. The second one is precisely the same title. Oh, yeah, the second one called Resolution Process, another title, is a document that I would envision us sending out to respondents, maybe even complainants too, so we have to think about that, but so that they are aware of how the process works and what their rights are in the process. The third document is just a real rough draft that should get tossed actually, because that was just something I was working on. I sent it to Lisa at one time, but it was something I sent to Steve.
Is-
I have two resolution processes. One is 2 pages long and one is 3 pages long.
Oh, that's. Was the concept that this would be included in the code or in a?
I think it
I thought
was,
it
we
was
do
an
need
internal
some code
document.
The first
changes.
3-page document is the board process, and the second 2-page document is the public process.
Right, but then I have.
Then I have another one on
The
it.
third one is the original document that I was working off of.
Okay.
So there was a document that Lisa found for us that the board at some point, maybe back a year ago, cooked up on how to do this. And it's from this that I drew out the other two.
This may be what's on the website now. 1486.
And then the very last thing is a flow chart that I came up with. how the process works. And again, that could be either something public or internal for the board, just to cover the board. So in some sense, the first question is, in terms of this first document, do we think it's consistent with the code, that adequately reflects what the process is in the code, and adequately reflects our practice, like what we actually do? That's what I was trying to get at, is both what's in how the code lays it out, but then like some of the things that we do. And so just to highlight, like one thing that we do that is not in the code is when we accept it. If you take a look at the fourth bullet point, the Board of Ethics will determine if the facts alleged in this that have reasonable epistemic value and if proven would constitute a violation of the ethics code. Now, the ethics code just simply says, if true, would constitute a violation of the code. We have gotten into the habit of at least stopping first and saying, are these charges, even plausible? Is there some truth to them? Or is this something that in about, 30 seconds, you can consult the clerk's office and find out, actually, this is just completely false. Like, the allegations made here have no basis in fact whatsoever. Sometimes we've called this our little pre-investigation, right? But sometimes rather than launching a formal investigation for something that can very easily be determined to be completely false, we've been doing that. Now, that's not in the code, so that would be an example of something that we've been doing as a practice.
We went round and round about that word plausible, trying to figure out if that was.
Well, and that's why it's been replaced with reasonable epistemic value, right?
So that's a word I'm not familiar with.
Well, and that's right, and that's the important thing, that someone reading this not from the board will have
Doesn't know what epistemic
That's right.
is.
That's a good thing.
But we have received notice of potential violations that somebody's either shotgunning it and we get this, pages and pages and pages of something that had nothing to do with us. It's not even an ethics violation.
Right.
It has, somebody's mad at somebody, said, oh, well, the Board of Ethics will investigate. That'll just drag them to the coals, and we go like, oh.
Well, they've tried
not us.
several other areas, and
Yeah.
they just keep getting sent here, or they wind up here.
Well, and we've had a couple, those I think are covered under the idea that even if this were proven, would it be a violation of the code? And if people are alleging, like what the one we got last month, they're like, this person's violating,
Right.
the ideal of due process. Or something.
Right,
Like, well,
right.
that's just not, that's just not it. But in other cases, we have, I think, where people like, so-and-so conducted this meeting with this clear conflict of interest because they own stock or they own this, and it's like, well, is that even true? That's something we can find out in 2 minutes. Do we really need to launch a formal investigation into that? So epistemic it has to do with knowledge. Episteme means knowledge, and so reasonable epistemic value means that you think it's plausible, basically.
Mhm.
Then why
Is
not
there
just
any
say
kind of
plausible?
screening that the clerk's office can do prior to having the number assigned and getting into the?
In terms of like have them do the
Right.
plausibility. thing.
Well, just, identifying right off the bat that this is addressed to the wrong committee, or that, I don't know, is there a
Right now,
ability to do?
no, in fact, we don't even have a gatekeeping option like for the chair, right? You could imagine that, the chair gets this first and run this, this has nothing to do with the code of ethics. Just rejects it. Right now, it's the full-on board that has to do that. What this little plausibility shortcut has been trying to do is at least be a gatekeeper from launching a full-blown investigation. And being able to say, look, if we can determine very quickly that, a couple of simple facts here are false, then let's just do that and reject it rather than launching a formal investigation, which of course in turn triggers all sorts of procedures.
So you just witnessed the end of a notice of potential violation that was last year, which we received July or August? For NOPV 214-2.
No, we've done this quickly. This one we've done.
That was
quickly.
November.
The election, so
Yeah.
probably.
Okay, but they do drag out because you have to bring witnesses in, you have to discuss it with them.
Filed at the clerk's office October 17th,
So
2014.
it's still 4 months of time. And that was fast for us. And we have a clock of 90 days and we can extend that extra time. But it is very difficult when you have a meeting once a month and you've got other things you have to deal with to get them done, and you get witnesses to bring in. Because we'll have one meeting just to determine are we going to accept this?
Well, I like the idea though of the gatekeeper, but I wonder if that ought to be the attorneys for the board. Now, the only issue, and oftentimes I act in that role anyway. I mean, actually, a lot of the referrals are from our office saying, well, then go file this, or now, do you want, well, I was going to say, the person in my position is more identified with the administration. Does that affect the gatekeeping role? I can't imagine anything that is political or this and that's not gonna, it would get through. I mean, I don't see that as a real concern in the long run. I mean, I advise you all the rest of the time. But then someone in Glenda's position could do that as well. One of the things that helps when, a couple of the times when I've acted sort of in that capacity, it's really for once I think that you need to have more information to even make any kind of determination whether to go forward. Remember that I'll have a couple of the people here, and because you don't know how purchasing works, and that I think is helpful, because otherwise you're getting this, on month 1 and debating whether to keep it, and then month 2 then you're getting witnesses, and month 3 you're deciding, oh yeah, we should do this, and so it's been strung out, versus if you had the attorney for the board who's familiar with the municipal processes be more of a gatekeeper. I mean, it might be more appropriate than the clerk.
I have a question on this gatekeeping function. Are we seeing a lot of notices of potential violations that are frivolous and that need to be spiked at the outset?
Yeah, a fair amount.
And are they frivolous because the board doesn't have jurisdiction over them, or because they're so totally implausible that it doesn't seem worthy of consideration?
Sort of both.
Because you filter out a lot from us.
Yeah, I do
right?
actually.
Before it even gets.
Well, no, I'll say some. People call, I'm the city's ethics officer too, so people will call me and say, "Do I have a problem? What should I do?" And a lot of times, so those are filtered right at the front end. Having said that, a good majority of the notices of potential violation you get came through me first, occasionally the ombudsman.
I'm wondering how much additional it is for the board if we just review a notice of potential violation with the recommendation from D that this is outside the board's jurisdiction, or that the facts are implausible.
Well, and
I say
I'm
that
pretty
only because
conservative
It seems like the
on
way
that,
the
so.
code is written is that it really is a deterrent. It's just what's to lie with the board, and I'm not sure if I were a complainant and I was told this never even made it to the board, it evaporated before it hit the board, how I would react to that.
Yeah, I agree. So maybe we have 2 gatekeeping functions. One is this sort of predetermination, and that, the attorney's office could make the recommendation, or, more of a presentation at meeting number 1, and or if the attorney says, wait a minute, either you need more witnesses or probably you're going to decide to go forward, that I do in fact have people available to come. But then have we given notice? Usually the people I've had come have been members of the administration, who have sort of some knowledge, but really, I don't know whether, I'm just trying to think out loud, does the respondent, should they have been notified of that when we're bringing in these witnesses early on to try to even determine whether to go forward?
We also need to remember, we just finished 214-2. We didn't have a whole lot of notice of potential violations. We have, however, had relatively high profile ones between this one and a previous one that having to do with a board member who was elected to a LRSA board. But other than that, it was.
Well, but we were also involved in a few things that we didn't write anything on, with the election issue.
Yeah, they didn't come in via
Assemblyman
the notice of potential
Burge,
violation.
right, it
Well,
came
those were advice.
A request for advisory
Yeah,
opinion.
request for advisory opinions.
But part of the issue is not just workload. I mean, the concern, and there's why we should talk about, we want to do this pre-investigation type, have this plausibility type standard, to kind of like go full on. In the past, we had a couple really controversial issues, and some board members were concerned about the idea of launching a formal investigation based on allegations that seemed false, not wildly implausible, but just seemed false and could be very quickly confirmed to be true or false. And the concern it has, boy, this was a very high-profile individual that the complaint was going to be against.
Mhm.
Do we even? I understand the person's like, I know this is all supposed to be confidential, But my concern is if we, should we launch a formal ethics investigation against this person based on facts that can be very quickly to be determined to be true or false, and which seem like they're probably false. Why don't we just go ahead and do that? And in that case, we did, and we ultimately did not get involved in a formal investigation. And then the practice sort of stuck because it seemed kind of reasonable. I mean, in principle, it seems reasonable because people could make outlandish allegations, back on a factual basis, right? That, oh yeah, if true, I guess if, so and so was, in the Bahamas with Vladimir Putin last week receiving bribes.
But it's true,
Okay, I
it
guess
is
that
substantiated somehow. It requires
Well,
some
at least,
sort
or
of.
at least it has to have some sort of reasonable epistemic value.
Exactly, substantiated.
Well, I think I'm generally in favor of having this sort of frivolousness check on the outset, and it seems like the code gives us some cover for that. So if you're in 15, what are we in, 70 D? 70, my number
B,
is all
I
D,
think.
right?
B.
It says we're allowed to determine if further action on the potential violation is warranted. This is page 2430 in the printout that we got. And then we have 1 and 2, which step down from that general standard. The first one says.
I'm sorry, let me catch up with you. Where are you, Bill?
I'm not.
D?
I have a
1570.
70D.
D.
Ahead of 1, mine is
Oh.
page 2430.
Had it.
It says we review it in an executive session, determine whether further action on the notification of potential violation is warranted, sort of as a general standard. Then 1 says we can specifically spike it if we think the facts even if proved don't state violation, or if we don't have jurisdiction. It doesn't expressly say if we can readily determine that the facts alleged are false, then we can also spike it. But I think we have enough cover from 70. And I'll also say, in terms of not having to reinvent the wheel, it kind of reminds me of like judicial notice of the facts. So the way that the rules work, the court, you can say, before you even get started, like the court just to verify or take notice of the fact that X, Y, or Z is true, and the standard in the rule is that if it's generally known within the state or it's capable of accurate and ready determination by resort to sources whose accuracy cannot be reasonably questioned. I wonder if we could steal something like that so that we get a complaint that we could easily and readily determine the sources whose accuracy cannot be legitimately questioned if the facts are incorrect. We don't have to notify people that they're the subject of a complaint, start up an investigation.
Yeah.
Yes, the concept there is that it's covered. We don't need to recreate an amendment to the rule.
Which is good. I mean, because if we read the code that way,
'Cause that's
then
kind of
this
what we're
particular
doing.
practice is not sort of like
Yeah.
in violation of the code. It's
Yeah.
just sort of filling in a gap in the code or something. It's code silent as to whether this is actually written.
I'll tell you, the sense here that has always bothered me, and I think us sort of is in D1. It's the very first part of that sentence. The board determines the facts alleged in the notification of potential violation, even if proven, do not constitute a violation. I mean, think of the one, and I don't need to do names, where a person came in and alleged that a board member had substantial interest in some stuff that was going on before the board. We had to do a whole,
We ended up doing an investigation before we said,
there's something.
It's almost like the respondent doesn't have the right to be heard, I mean, you're not getting, even though, I find it difficult to make a decision just hearing one side and just making a determination based
well,
on.
we have interviewed, we'll interview, sometimes we'll look at it in the face value, something we can take over, like the most one we just finished up. Others, we have had to do a full interview of the complainant and the respondent before we make any determination as to whether we're going to. In fact, I think the one here regarding to was about I think it was a land development.
Mhm,
Yeah. And we spent a lot of time on that and ended up not taking it, I believe.
Yeah, well, yeah, but meanwhile, we had done all that work and really had reasoned why it wouldn't constitute a violation, and those need to be in opinions. So it's sort of like this is, if your conclusion is it's not a violation, then you don't take it. Really, the conclusion is not a violation is at the end of this process. So I think there's a difference between what Dr. Kelly is talking about, which is the things that just don't even make an initial cut, versus the school board one too, and that'll be published if it's not already published. A notice of a potential violation. We had to go through the whole process to get to the point that the facts alleged in the notification, even if proven, do not constitute a violation.
I wasn't involved in the earlier one, but it seems like I might have lobbied to do the investigation in the one we were actually doing a lot of actual fact finding. Because the way I read this sentence is more like a 12b6 failure to state a claim. You'd say like, oh, someone has alleged that someone violated the Open Meetings Act. We'd say, well, even if that's true, that's nothing to do with us, and so there's no violation. We don't even take that.
And we've had that. That's come across too, where we've had
Yeah.
that.
So I
Even
would
if
see this-
everything that's written in there is absolute truth, it still doesn't invoke the jurisdiction of the board. So that gets kicked instantly for basically failure to state a claim. And then you have the others where you have a complainant who comes in alleging things. And I think there is some responsibility to ask a complainant to come in with more than just blanket allegations. There should be, they don't have to carry a full burden of proof, but we gotta get over the initial hurdle. And then that's when we go to the next step.
But I think I share sort of the intuition that would be used sparingly, despite things
Right.
at the outset. I mean, if somebody comes in and says, I know these people are really the elected officials because Alaska's not a real state, and we're under
Yeah.
martial law, and like, I don't think we'd have to do an
No,
investigation of that.
we get that, then we need to be aware that there are people who come watch us every once in a while too.
But I do think lack reasonable epistemic value might be helpfully clarified. Non-PhD members of the board.
Cannot get any more precise than that.
Well, we could rewrite this whole thing to be informal logic if we were looking at
Oh,
100%.
trust me. Trust me.
There's some upside down A's. in
Trust me,
that.
epistemic value is my compromise.
He's actually been asked to simplify his writing, and this is simplified.
My term of the use of Kafka-esque in an opinion apparently
I would
is
call it
like
Kafka.
Yeah.
notoriety.
The assembly just couldn't do that one. They still bring that up all the time. What?
Yeah. While chair, he created quite a reputation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The dark ages. The lost weekend. So that's just to highlight like one of the things that we do, and so I tried to get that in, and then that way, future boards, because sometimes we do have some fairly rapid turnover on the board, and then that way we sort of like have something where everyone kind of like understands like how the process works.
You know, and for this is something entirely different. Something that might be helpful for me when I'm working with people is maybe some type of handout to a potential complainant. Because at this point I say, well, cite this code section, put down some facts, and that should be enough to get the ball rolling. I mean, they're regular people, they're not attorneys. And then I know one of those that I sent here, you said, well, this doesn't make any sense, there's nothing here. And I was like, well, wait a minute, I told her just to say that much, is to let the complaint, give, how much do we want from the complainant up front as well? In fact, I think that was the Lursa one. That initially you said, well, this is ridiculous.
It was a one sentence.
And that's the one that we ended up
Spending a lot of time.
taking huge steps with. So maybe I'll just put that as a side. Is I should
I'd
do something
almost-
to the complainant, what we want from a complainant.
Because
in
I
the-
guess we would want a little more info. Some of these are real sketchy. You look, you read the email and you're like, what?
Mm-hmm.
You know there's something more behind it, but all we have is complaint.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very little, and it's hard to start studying ahead and see what's going
Well,
on.
should the complainant just necessarily be at the initial meeting, available for questions? Instead of us then having to call and wait a month?
Well, and the code, I mean, like, part of it is that, I mean, you're right, the form sort of like gives this impression that, writing a sentence or two is going to be sufficient, but the code says that the person who wrote the complaint is supposed to provide a list of documents, and things. I mean, like, that they're really supposed to do.
Some work.
You might remember the one that we had that
Mhm.
involved land development, stuff like that.
Mhm.
I remember that person included like a 7-page attachment, right? And it had
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
Here's the history, here's where I think it relates to the code, here are people you could talk to about this. It's sort of what they're supposed to be doing. And so you're right, a little how-to You know, kind of, so you wanna file an ethics complaint, you know, and then sort of like walking people.
Well, and advising whether it's confidential or not. It is confidential.
And we've had
Initially.
problems there, people not realizing, or at least, you know, saying that they didn't realize at first that this was supposed to be confidential. Or anytime they file a notice of potential violation, then they're writing an editorial about it in the newspaper.
So the form is in the back of the book.
The notice of potential violation.
Yeah. And it does
But
ask.
even this most recent one, the person copied, you know, we got copies of the evidence, the ads, they were delivered to us and all in the mail. So there was enough information
that
to
one
go
was
on
well
from there.
done,
Yes.
That was well done.
Do we want line edits on this at all? Like, for instance, on the bottom of page 1, we're not limited to those witnesses and documents suggested by the complacent. Which I never feel myself to be limited by the complacent.
That's great. That's a specialized term that we use.
I have that one a question mark, complacent, what,
Well, I mean, if you're ethically complacent, you're gonna wind up having a complaint.
And then right above that, greater than 0.5 of what? What are we measuring?
well, it's greater, if it's, well, they're saying it's the preponderance of evidence, it's more
There's
than,
another Terryism.
it doesn't have to be a
That's
full
notation of
100%.
probability theory, so.
Oh,
greater
yeah,
than
yeah, but
0.5
I'm
means
thinking
better.
about the average Joe who's reading this.
Yeah,
Well, no, remember,
we'll
this is
take
gonna
it
be
out.
our
Oh,
internal.
this is the internal one. Oh,
For
okay,
us.
that's right.
Because there have been
will not
some
see
cases
that.
where you can't say, there might be a reasonable doubt, but preponderance is different.
Need a test for new members.
I did have, maybe I just missed this, the second bullet on the next page says that if the complaint violates the confidentiality, then the notice of potential violation is dismissed. Is that in the code, or is that?
Yes,
it
that
is.
seems to be in the-
They have to pick their form, basically.
And we,
Where does the person go if it is, if it's opened up to the public and we have to dismiss it? Where does the person go?
Just wherever. I mean, then they go back to the newspaper, the blog, the
Oh.
assembly.
Really?
Yeah.
To the assembly?
Yeah.
Right.
And in fact, we're on record for having instructed the assembly that we will also dismiss stuff if they do it the other way around. So if you publicly talk about a code violation and the fact that the ethics board should look into this, and then you file a notice of potential violation, we count that as 2 bites of the same apple for the same reason and dismiss it.
Formal rules of evidence do not apply to.
Well, see, that one always made me more
Should be
uncomfortable
fair.
because.
It's before the filing.
Well, if someone is angry about something, they go to the assembly and say, I think this is wrong, and da-da-da-da, and the assembly says, hey, you should go to the ethics board, what?
well, I think that's different than assemblyman or woman.
Yeah, this was advice we gave to the assembly, right? So that's different from, remember the
If
case
they
that we
make a
had where
complaint about
we had
it.
a case where an assembly person was giving a long
Oh, okay.
speech during an assembly meeting. This is an ethics code violation, and I think the ethics board needs to look at this, da, 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 da. And we sort of like put them on notice. You can do that, but then you can't turn around and also file a notice and say, well, I'm observing confidentiality.
Yeah.
You've already had your one. I think for the average citizen, it's different. They don't know until they file that their confidentiality applies.
I think it was for the new board members, a selection of form issue, but also just political nature, that you can't use the ethics board for political grandstanding. And if you're gonna do that political grandstanding, we'll do it in other forums and don't come here.
And it happens, they try, and we resist it.
Well, that's one of the main
I
things.
think you're probably familiar with political grandstanding in your former position, yeah.
Other miscellaneous ones on the last bullet under hearing, I think it's officially executive session, not deliberative session.
Let's see.
Oh.
Which one?
Under
Deliberations on the NOPB are held in.
No, it's
No, it actually is
deliberative session.
deliberative.
Deliberative sessions are double secret.
Double
Executive
secret.
session.
So
So
they're
the
not
difference is,
recorded.
so it's not public and it's not recorded. Executive sessions are not public, but they are recorded on a separate file.
So your fact finding is in the executive session, because then that'll be available to the public later on, but the deliberations of the board are not.
Did we add a B?
Oh, I
as
see.
we
So,
should on-
so I was looking at 70F
Yes.
that reads deliberations of the board shall be conducted in executive session, but we're calling it deliberative session because it has special additional requirements.
Okay, now where are you, Bill?
70D, or 70F, says deliberations of the board shall be conducted in executive session, but we're calling it super secret deliberative session because then F1
F1 is not recorded.
exempts us further from the
Right,
recording.
yes,
Right.
that's right, that's right. That's super secret.
Do we always go to hearing? Or are decisions?
No, actually, quite often not. Just-
But in any case, we issue a decision on the case itself,
Mhm, mhm.
and it's sent out to the complainant and the respondent, or is it?
In, to the assembly
Into the
and,
assembly?
Well, in certain situations, that there's provisions for it to be returned to the complainant. You're talking about an NOPD?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, if we, I'm trying to remember, if we reject it,
Right, so.
right, it
Right.
doesn't, it only goes back
To
to
the,
what we sent. So here's the thing, so it says if we reject it, then we just sort of reject, we send like a little, what we used to do is just sort of like send a little form letter saying to the complainant, it's been rejected, and to the respondent,
Right.
we found no violation. And that, since then, this is actually something we could talk about, like, and I think I actually indicated that, I think I wanted to put it kind of, it's our discretion if we wanted to include a broader letter, because in some cases, both when we choose not to even launch a formal investigation and in cases where there's been a formal investigation, it just felt like we owed more to the complainant than just a formal letter saying it's been rejected, that we felt like we owed them some explanation as to why this turned out not to be a code violation.
and I think.
That's the D1 provision that says that if we look at it, if the board looks at it and finds that even if everything in there is absolutely true, it wouldn't constitute an ethics violation, or that it's something that's beyond the scope of the ethics board's jurisdiction, that goes back to them. And that's what I think Tara's saying is, we should include something that says, thank you for, reaching out to us, we appreciate it, but however, we either lack jurisdiction or we're gonna return this to you without further action because something very short and sweet. But at least providing something.
Providing some reason.
Right.
Yeah. And then, but then
But-
also too, for the second kind of scenario you could imagine in which you do launch an investigation and you
Right.
find that the code really hasn't been violated. I mean, notice the standard's a little bit weaker at the beginning, right? It's like,
Right.
if true, may constitute a violation.
Right.
When you launch your investigation, it's gotta be, you determine that it is in fact true and does constitute, but you may find actually, it looked like it might have constituted a violation, but it really isn't. Now again, there, I don't think the code says much about what we return to the complainant. And again, in some cases, what we've done is we've sent almost the same form letter. Thanks for
Thank you.
applying,
We
but,
looked into it,
we
but-
looked into it, we didn't find
Right.
anything.
But
We just
we
felt
were-
like for some cases, we owed them a little bit more, and I'd sort of like to keep it at our discretion, because it seems like some cases, not much more is owed. It's like we looked at it, and it's not a violation, but in some cases, it seems like more is owed that.
we
that-
wrote
that
the one
that
that the school
complete-
board was more because of that issue.
Yeah, because some of them are really reasonable. Some of them, it's like you look at it and you're like, wow, at first blush, that really does look like that's a code violation.
Or it's a good question.
Yeah.
It's an open question. And I think we can tell you whether the school board won it, because that's, again, gonna be published on the website anyway, was whether, the funding they used for ballot bond propositions, violated the code.
Advertising.
And, yeah, advertisements.
And it referred us
Sorry.
to state regulations and
So, anyway, that was a decision that we thought was helpful, plus the person who filed that's really a well-stated question,
Mhm.
and one that was likely to come up again. So I do like the discretionary standard.
We wrote a response for that, didn't we?
Yeah, that's in here. Glenda did.
This doesn't seem to give us, slowing you guys down.
Oh, no.
Newbie questions, under D. It doesn't seem to give us the out of not having a hearing. If we determine that the allegations may constitute a violation, then you can give the respondent the choice of to have their hearing in public or private, but it doesn't say you have the option to have a hearing. It just launches right into a hearing.
Yeah, that's the way we've always read it, right? And that's why I've always felt like this practice of our little pre-investigation type thing is a little dodgy, that it's sort of like it's the way we do it, but it's not necessarily in the code. And that's why I very much like Bill's recommendation that if you look at, if you say that we meet in executive session and first determine if further action is warranted. And then, one way of thinking about it is that what number one then does is it lists one reason why you may think that further action is not warranted. You may say, hey, even if this were true, it doesn't constitute a violation of code. That's one reason to no longer pursue it. But it's silent on the question of, when you're in that first executive session, could you say, no, the further action on this is warranted because these claims are false?
And I think without exception, if we have taken it, we always bring the complaint in typically, don't we?
Oh, if we accept
take
it, we always bring the
Oh,
complaint. We
I
always
see.
bring
Oh,
the complaint.
We've always-
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
been-
Pretty
once
much
it's
the
accepted.
responded as well.
And the respondent as well, we've always done that,
That's right.
because a
And-
lot of times we'll get that one sentence on there. We don't always get a supplemental explanation of what their complaint is.
Mhm.
And
But
so they come in and they help explain everything for us. I think we've always done that.
Yeah, I mean, in
Oh,
these cases,
okay.
the kind of cases where we're talking about this gatekeeping function in terms of facts, is that, that there's a number of key facts that are fairly objective things that can be discovered, as Bill cited that judicial standard, right? Like talking to the clerk's office or finding a document or something like that. An accusation that someone didn't file their disclosure, well, gosh, should we launch a formal investigation, or should we ask Lisa to look through the file and in 2 minutes find out whether that disclosure was filed or not? If it's there, well, then why get into a formal investigation? Let's just reject it because it's false.
Well, and then we've decided cases where we quote defer jurisdiction, and those are often to say in a disgruntled employee situation who's been to 3 other forums already. And that we defer jurisdiction to the appropriate body. So that's a quickie one too, but
Right.
we don't hear anybody. Did we hear the employee that time? I can't remember. We did, didn't we? The last one, did we not hear the employee? No, I guess we didn't. The one.
I don't think
where-
we did, the one that was complaining about something
The
that happened several years
babysitting.
ago.
I was gonna say the babysitting one, yeah, no, we didn't hear that, no, we just
Okay.
sort of said, like, geez, this is not really the proper.
No, this is a personnel issue and not an ethics issue, so.
Okay, considering we're a volunteer board, how much energy and time do we put into the investigation versus relying on what the complainant and respondent provide to us? I mean, from my experience before, on APOC, was that we sat as judge and the information was brought to us, we didn't go out and do an investigation.
Most of the time we rely on what's given to us, but Dee and Glenda, and Lisa, they do a lot of gathering. I'd say some gathering for us, and they find out because you have all your connections with the municipality, so you can go out and you talk to purchasing, or talk to that person, or talk to, right?
I'd say,
and
yeah.
supplement the record.
I'd say this board, at least as a board,
Yeah.
we are, in most cases, we're actively investigating.
We are.
Now, it's
Yeah,
not
'cause
us.
But it's not us
But
who
it's
is
usually
doing
Dee or
it.
Lisa.
Oh,
That
I
we're-
see.
that Dee will say,
Okay.
well, something, this involves purchasing, how about I bring the purchasing person down to talk about how this contract got
Okay.
resolved?
And
So
so
they
they-
say, I'll go find those disclosure forms, or I'll find out the minutes, I'll get the minutes from those meetings. So, yeah, so we kind of
Yeah.
think it's more like a magistrate style kind of thing. It's like, what
But
information would we like to find that would be helpful? We have subpoena power, we could, bring people, and so,
Right.
and we've done that.
And then what our investigation typically means that we have people come and testify, and then we evaluate the testimony. But we met, I assume they told you this before you signed on, we met 26 times last year. didn't we?
No, they told us after.
They told us after we took the oath.
Did they
I
really?
can tell it.
No, they, hang on that. Yeah, no,
Well, and 20-some the year before, too.
So we don't actively go out.
Okay.
We rely on them to do that, but we do the hearings, and that's what takes a
Yeah.
lot of time.
I would
too.
anticipate it's far less sophisticated parties that come here versus before APOC.
Right.
And they're almost never represented by counsel.
No.
This last one was a little bit unusual.
Yeah.
Which means usually the complainants are also very unsophisticated, so the complaint is often, I saw this on TV, or I read this in the paper, and I don't think that's right. It's
Right.
gotta be, and then, hey, see, I'll check this, is this
Right.
right? But if you notice, I put it in here, that it should be in here. Our practice has been not to limit our investigation to whatever box happens to get checked off on the form. So if someone says it was like an 035, but it's really, we find something in
We'll go
15,
look around.
that's fine. We say, this is, what the citizen, we're asking them, we'd like to get as much as possible, and I think a how-to sheet would be helpful
Mhm,
there.
mhm.
But, we're mostly taking that as a kind of like, you draw our attention to a problem, and then we'll go figure it out.
So more on our draft form, there's a you that should be a your, I think, and a bullet right before written report, depending on you, what status.
Yeah, it does. Well, that's the
Roman
professorial you.
Right.
Roman numeral 3?
This is the
Yeah, Roman numeral 3, the second bullet.
And then on written report, so two things that struck me about this one. One is, I think that code doesn't obligate us to, maybe this is not true, I'll ask this question. I'm not sure whether we're obligated to write a written report if we don't find a violation. But it looks like the way this internal guidance is set up, we write a written report either way, which is probably
Oh,
better
let's see,
practice.
there's no resolution. Oh, yeah, no, you're right, no, that should be, that should be if there's a violation.
Okay, so
And there's
then,
no, because the resolution and settlement part is
Right,
that
right,
you have
right.
found a violation, and then you try to form a settlement with the violator.
And-
And if you can't do
Right.
that, then.
okay.
Well,
It's
So
also
if we
add that
find a
in.
violation and there's no resolution, so
Yeah.
then we do this written report. And then I just noticed that we got 1, 2, 3, 4 here, but the code has A through F. And I didn't really know why we didn't here at B, C, and D. Maybe the intent was just to collapse them into 2, but 1, 3, and 4 are verbatim, I think, transcriptions of A, E, and F. But otherwise, the list is a little different.
I have to go to about a 5-10 minute meeting at 1 o'clock with the administration. I'll be right back.
Well, let's take a look. So where you are at 70,
The written report.
oh, yeah, right, let's see. Someone investigation. B, do we have B in there?
Not unless it's, I think it'd be part of 2.
No, I don't think so, because, because typically we haven't done that, so this is the practice, that we typically haven't made a list of documents submitted.
You could collapse that easily into one, a summary of the investigation, including any documents submitted.
And I flag it only because I wouldn't want us to lose the requirements of the code working from the British.
Right.
Are there any appeal rights from RC?
No, only in the sense that any sanction that we recommend has to be approved by the assembly or by the administration, and so there's only one that has the capacity sort of like to appeal that.
I suppose if you wanted to appeal the denial, you can go to another venue, go to the
Well,
assembly.
as an example,
Yeah.
one of the sanctions on a previous case that we did do was recommend the person give up a contract and quit the board, and he just quit the board. And so the assembly never had to take it up, because at the point, and the deal was, his contract was the preferred contract for most of the hillside. For, the preferred contractor.
He still has
Hmm?
He still has the contract? He just gave up his board seat, that's all.
The first bullet on page 3
Well,
of
he had
3
the other guy
is
vote.
just for clarification.
And
Right now it reads, if the
Did we
NOPD
make
was
any
substantiated
change?
in one part, a copy will be given too, but the copy is a copy of the written report, not of the NOPD, right?
Do you go
Right,
to those
so
meetings?
it's a bullet point
No,
of a
that's
written
2 doors
report
down.
section.
It might just be helpful to throw
doors
in.
down for
Two
you?
doors down.
Were you
Copy
involved
of the
in that
written
whole
report
decision?
will
You
be
weren't
given.
on-
That was
so you
all
found out
before
that
me,
later?
But
By the
it's
municipal clerk.
perfect. I mean, now that I know
We
it, I'm
never
like, well,
published
of course,
the
that's it.
original NOPD or maybe we did, I don't know.
So,
Fantastic.
so Catherine, you need to know that you joined a group that this individual we're talking about termed us to be a bunch of old white guys who
Oh.
were judging him.
Oh, no, you could have been included in my category, which was bloodsucker.
Yeah.
No, did he call me, he called me a couple names. Yeah, he didn't like me at all, and he wouldn't like you either, so.
Well,
it wasn't-
I'm sweetness and light.
See, I asked David to question him. As a former prosecutor, I thought he would be able to do an excellent, and he did do an excellent job of questioning this man. And it was nice to listen, kind of sit back and watch him just kind of unravel in front of us.
Okay, where are we at? Are we still line editing this one?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that was what I saw on this one.
Okay. Did anybody else have any other questions? And again, this is internal, right? So we're not, this is just this doesn't need to be approved or moved or published or, are we gonna publish this?
Not this,
No.
not this one.
This one I think would just be,
Okay.
I imagine it'll go in this packet and it'll be part of the organization.
Are you keeping track of the edits?
I am,
Or
but I know
somebody-
that Terry is. You'll
Yeah.
probably
Oh, you're gonna
do your
make
own
that.
editing.
Sure.
Oh, okay. All right.
And Terry, I really liked your flow chart because putting it graphically like that makes it real easy for us to people to see where we're going and what we're doing.
Some minds work in flowcharts.
What's
Right?
that?
Some minds
Absolutely.
work in
Visual-
flowcharts.
visual
Visual,
language,
yeah.
absolutely.
There is a typo.
On the flowchart?
Yeah, on the flow chart, under, the very bottom, yeah, right there, it should be, meet with R2,
Oh,
Ah,
determine session.
R2D2.
Terry, is this the document you said that really is obsolete? This one that begins preliminary consideration?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just kind of a rough
I was
outline.
just starting to work on it. This is just
Yeah,
how I was
yeah.
kicking around. And Lisa found this nice document from the 2007 board, and so I just tossed this and started
Oh, so
working with
this
it.
board had already tried this before, or had already done this before?
There's a 2007 version of this.
Oh.
Yeah, and,
Well, I'm glad you found that because that we didn't have to recreate.
Oh,
the-
it's huge. I mean,
Can I toss
Was
it?
it consistent?
Yeah.
Was it pretty consistent with what we intended?
It was very consistent, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I would say the only substantive thing really was this little pre-investigation type
Mm.
thing that we do. Just about
Good.
everything else was just about dead on.
At this time. The, and the,
Well, what I did, I will say for the first document, what I did is I did add some stuff to the first document because the original 2007 document was clearly written for a respondent.
right.
Because it's got this section, if you're named in a notice,
Right.
because, and so it was, so it had to, so I included a little bit more of the details like preponderance of the evidence and what that, just for like, so board members could look at that and go, okay, what's the process, what are we looking at?
Mhm.
The second one had some stuff's been taken out and other stuff's been put in because now the intended audience is a respondent. So in other words, so my vision here is that we basically attach this with the copy of the complaint that they received.
And this is one of two, resolution. Oh, which one?
So the
Well, you
one that's
mentioned this
called-
earlier. Is it one of three or one or two?
The one that's called
One of,
NOPD process is for the board. The one that's called
Yeah, yeah.
resolution process, the first one,
first one.
is the one I came up with. The second one, which has in the right-hand corner, Form A6 revised 22207, that is the document that I started working with.
Oh,
Oh.
that's interesting. Oh, one of three.
So you can actually see the original that I started working with.
Okay, so this
Here's-
is yours.
Yeah, so the
Yeah,
first one is,
so-
what I took that original document and set up something for us. Then I took that original
Yeah.
document and set up something to give to respondents.
And then this
The
is the
third
original.
document is actually their
Gotcha.
original document that I was working on.
Alright, so,
So I lied to myself, I had nothing else, because I just found my notes that I've been looking
Oh.
for this whole time.
Excellent.
And these are additional considerations you may or may not want to roll into this, but, first, back on the investigation, there's a special rule for notices of potential violation filed against a candidate during the election
Yeah,
period,
right.
and that's not mentioned in here or any other timeline, so we might add a bullet about that. I'm just gonna go through and catch the ones I didn't catch before. On the second page under hearings, the hearings are held in executive session, but it looked like in code 70E10, that ultimately those, which is really wild to me, that those executive sessions do become public after we publish the resolution and settlement or the written report.
Yes.
Yeah, so Aaron,
That's
if
what-
the violation, if there is found that there's a violation, then those recordings become public.
Okay, and that might be worth it.
do we
And that
post
explains,
those or
that's why you
they
have
they
that
can
distinction
access them?
between
Uh,
executives.
yes.
A person can ask for it, but it's not.
No, that it's posted
It's
and they can
posted.
access it through the website.
The hearings, our executive sessions,
Well, only for
The
the
recording.
ones that have
Right.
been,
right.
yeah, when we
Yeah.
found it a violation.
And so a person can link to the recording of that executive session?
Mhm.
No?
So now it says
So would
it's
you
not
look-
public, but recorded in a separate audio file, but it's sort of more technically true to say it's not public for the duration of the investigation, but will be made public.
might be made.
Maybe made public.
Maybe.
So maybe include that, what do you think, maybe include that in the written report section, that if the notice was substantiated,
Mhm.
a copy will be given the respondent, complete in the municipal clerk, and hearing tapes, hearing recordings, will be made public. Yeah.
And then the last two I had are.
Oh, and then did people want to put the political, I left that out mostly because just to keep the document sort of manageable, but if people think that that's an important one, that should be in
Well,
there.
if
So
it's
there's various provisions about if you file something that can a political candidate within a campaign period, right, which is like, what, 90 days before?
Well, if that's actually before us, we're gonna be pouring through this.
Right.
We're not gonna be relying on this, right? This to me is kind of a roadmap,
That's the way I was envisioning it.
not to be inclusive of everything, because it's more of a, okay, I remember this discussion that we had, it was during that session that we had on, well, anyway, so that, I remember thinking, okay, what is the step-by-step process? Like, okay, we do this, now what do we do? Now what do we do?
Right.
We can include that political section, but but if we are actually doing the political section, I would imagine we're doing this.
I've just added as an addition, as a reference to the end of one of these bullets. rather
Cite to
than
the-
cite to
Sure.
the code
To the
rather
code
than
section, talking about it.
And it's actually good that we're doing this right now. This is a long-term project. I won't say how long, but that we're doing this with two new board members who can see the process right off the bat before we end up into an NOPD. Because at first, you're just flat lost. And I started right off with an NOPD against the mayor. And it was difficult.
So my last two were
Yeah.
on the last bullet under decision and further action by the board on page 2, right above written report. The board's authority to formulate a proposed resolution and settlement with the respondent is triggered, I think, only if the respondent admits that they violated the
Right.
code. And that's not mentioned in this bullet now, which seems to suggest we have a more broad authority to propose a resolution, so. But that's
Right.
That is one
70H,
requirement.
they have to have admitted that they
Right.
did it.
Right.
So we might roll that in. So the board has authority, or maybe even just an introductory clause. If a respondent admits to a violation of the chapter, the board has authority to.
propose a resolution.
Well, let's take a look at that language. Where was that?
That is
70.
70H.
We discussed that when we just completed the case, that was not the case.
Mhm.
In fact, it was the opposite.
Yeah, denial.
And then I think my very last one is the very last bullet where we say that the written report remains confidential if we don't find a violation or it's not substantiated. But that confidentiality too can be waived, right? And that's G4, at the sole discretion of the respondent, the board may release the statement of closure as a public document.
Right.
So that would be remain confidential unless
Unless
waived by the
waived.
respondent.
Okay.
And typically, I have found that in a lot of cases, political figures don't really, they try actually to keep it open,
Yeah.
whereas individuals don't want to, so.
All right, thanks, Bill.
And then the second one, you did have a lot of the same language, so I didn't have a lot more to add. I think the only two thoughts I had on this one were, on the if you are named, you have the right to submit a response, right? And I don't think that's mentioned in 1 through 5 right now. I don't know if that's explicitly true, but wouldn't that as a matter of practice be true? Hey, you've been named in a complaint, you have some ability to say,
Right.
here's
Yeah,
my
we-
response to this complaint.
And we typically invite But in every case, I think we've always invited the respondent.
Well, but what we, it is true, it has not been our practice to solicit like a written response. So typically what we do is we invite the complainant to come in and we sort of say, okay, what's your
Or the
what's your
respondent.
side of the story? But, what we haven't, but it is true, what we don't do is sort of solicit a response like we got out of this last one, we got like a letter from an attorney and stuff like that. We certainly could do that. That might be an improvement to the practice. What do you guys think?
To solicit a written response?
Well,
And
rather
you
not use
allow-
solicit it, I mean, you might just, if we're telling you,
Or you
you've
have
been
a
named,
right,
what are
right.
your options?
Right.
And one of the options is you can respond. I mean, you can even say, you may at your election, response is not an obligation. I just feel like.
These options is kind of, yeah.
Mhm.
You do kind of do that in the letter that I send out when I invite respondents. We list, you may bring an attorney, you may bring any evidence that you want the board to consider, you may have a written, so. And that, it's there in that form.
Right.
Right. But
Sure,
we
it could-
typically
it could-
relied sort of like on calling people in to talk to them, and that's been sort of their response. But it
You're right.
might not be a bad idea to sort of like just get something, at least offer them the option, say, okay, if ahead of time you want to submit a document, sort of like outline your defense or outline.
Well, it's kind of like
and
what happened in our last case. An attorney did it. Well, an
Right.
attorney is gonna be trained to expect to wanna respond. But the public, not having that kind of training, I would say a little prompt would be appropriate.
yeah, that's true. Again, and I think, I think that's maybe why we've always done it this way. is
No,
that
I
we-
think that is the prompt. It is in the letter,
It's
and
in
that
the
the
letter.
attorney at that point had called
Yeah.
me specifically and asked, can I da-da-da-da, and I said,
Well, 'cause
yeah.
she's got Bill's intuition, right? That,
Yeah.
well, surely they can submit some sort of response, but because most of the
Right.
people we're dealing with, from like a legalistic perspective, are so unsophisticated, we have typically sort of relied as, come on in and we'll talk to you
Right.
about it and we'll find out
Right.
what's been happening, so.
I think you have this pull and tug where you have this
Mhm.
proceeding where, as attorneys, we're trained that we're creating a record. And we want written documentation and we want testimony and we want to preserve the record for appellate review or for whatever else. But if you're a pro se litigant, you don't think in those terms. You don't think that I can submit something in writing, or if I come in and I talk to them, it's just gonna be talking with them. I don't think they're realizing, raise your right hand and everything that you say. And so I think you get two very, depending on the scope of the NOPV and depending on what's alleged, especially if it's a political activity, when you're going to two very different types of respondents coming before. You get the really unsophisticated pro ses, and then you get the fairly sophisticated, like we've also seen.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, and the way the board does it has changed. Like when I took over for you, it was very informal.
We've never done one.
Yeah, and so it was like really great ground. I mean, it was sort of like people. It was he wanted it very. In fact, in some ways, he made a philosophical decision to keep it non-legalistic. So it was a very informal thing. And the document that went out was like a letter. It was like literally, thanks for coming in, and here's what we.
Oh,
found."
so this has grown more formal throughout.
Well, it's grown in part because of the kind of things that Keith talked about.
Yeah.
Once the high-profile cases
Yeah.
started,
We had
that
these-
kind of process was far. It was
Yeah.
not rigorous enough. It just sort of collapsed under its own weight. Because as soon as you have people saying, "Well, why aren't you doing this?" or "Why, don't they have a right to this?" and I'm like, "Oh, geez, people always just sort of chatted it up with people."
Right,
But,
because
Well-
under two, we're kind of, it says you can bring legal counsel, when you meet with the ethics board, this is assuming that they would meet with the ethics board, and as an offshoot of that, they may bring a written response with them, or send it ahead of time. That would be an extension of that.
Well, I'll tell you, because I created the template we're using now, because I didn't have anything except
Yeah.
for some informal letters that were written before. And so in that particular case, I went straight to the code.
Mhm.
And in that letter template, I list bullet by bullet, you
Right.
may do this, 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 and this.
Mhm.
And so I guess this board has formalized that
Right.
process.
Yeah, and I don't mind, I think just adding that as a first one, like, first, you may
respond.
submit a response to the notice of potential
Sure.
violation, and then just making one, bumping the rest of them down.
Do we
Two,
want
you can do it in
to-
public, 3, you can bring legal counsel.
Do you wanna respond in writing? You wanna put in writing or just
Yeah,
respond?
or I would,
Because.
I think if you say submit a response to the board, I think
Period, yeah.
people would take that to be right, but I don't mind
Yeah.
saying submit a written response.
I suppose they could request an audience with the board.
They've done that.
Well, they certainly have, though, again, our practice, at least now, it hasn't always been our practice, I mean, like, there were, particularly, well, let me put it this way, particularly in cases where it got dismissed eventually, where we found that there was no violation, there were times that by the time we talked to 1 or 2 people, we knew that there was no violation, in which case we never talked to the respondent.
Right.
We just said, look, there's no violation here. But we've never, at least since I've been on the board, have found that there's been a violation without
No.
talking to the complainant.
Right.
Or, I'm sorry, to the respondent.
No, so we can add a bullet here. Yeah.
Yeah, so they've never had to request, I mean, like,
Right.
they could request, but we were, all, you know, in the case of, we're not gonna find a violation without having talked to them.
I think you start bumping up on fundamental fairness issues if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
did.
Absolutely.
I really
Well, in
would.
the one case we were talking about where we did not end up taking the case, but we did a lot of investigation, we never actually did talk to the respondent.
Right.
Right.
Because this was somebody who served on a board, and it was alleged that there was a conflict, and it hadn't been properly disclosed. So, but we found that there wasn't enough to say there was a case.
Right. But I think that's a reasonable option.
Yeah.
Kind of making it clear is a good.
On the other hand, we had one that was almost exactly the same thing, except that the complainant violated confidentiality, so we couldn't finish that one.
Mhm. Yeah.
My only other miscellaneous thought on the 2-pager was at one point we referred to the civil standard of proof. I don't know that we really need to do that. Just say the board uses the preponderance of the evidence standard. That's what.
Where's that?
That's,
Is that on page 2?
It's the 5th bullet on page 2.
Oh, yes, you know, some of this is just cut and paste out of the code, right? So.
Well, the code just says that, what does it say? It doesn't use that phrase, civil standard of proof.
Oh, it's got to somewhere, I would not put that in.
You
Trust me.
copied it off a previous version.
It's something, oh, you know, I got, actually, it's on the web, so it may not be.
It's E6, the standard of proof to be applied by the board in determining a violation of the chapter is proved by preponderance of the evidence.
Yeah. I wonder-
Which is what we've always used. That
Oh,
goes
that
back
might
to your
be- that
point
might be
here,
old language.
greater
This
than
actually is from-
0.5.
Is that maybe from the original document?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, it is.
Okay. Yeah, civil standard of proof, that doesn't sound like me.
Version.
Epistemic value, that's me. Oh, but no, so you can get rid of that, yeah.
So the plan for these documents is one just sort of lives in our packets and the other goes up on the website or gets distributed to people
We
when
can
they
put it on the
file or when
website.
they respond.
Yeah.
On the website for the second one.
Okay.
And then Steve Strom envisioned that this would go on to become a checklist with code reference. Do you still want to push it a step further
For a code, for us?
for
internal
the board,
document,
an
or
internal document?
Basically taking this first document and adding code references to it.
Well, I mean,
Oh, you want a checklist, okay, we've done this, we can go to the next step.
checklist, yeah, I don't know.
Different than the flow chart.
Well, it could be like the flow chart, I guess. I mean, that was Steve's idea,
Right.
so I don't know if you want to develop that or not.
Well, but there's a lot of ifs and thens, and
Yeah.
that would look a lot like a flow chart. I don't see any reason to pursue that. I don't know.
So,
I think we
you know,
have it
okay.
well covered.
I think, you know, at least the idea was to have some.
I mean, we have a flow chart.
We've got a flow chart, we've got
And
a
the
map,
narrative.
we
Yeah.
have the section of code after all, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
right.
we've got something to give to
Right.
respondents, we've got a quick reference,
Yeah.
you know, and a flow chart for us, you know, or new members, or something to give
Right.
new people.
Yeah, I think
that's
that's
pretty
enough.
good.
Okay.
Unless you feel otherwise.
Oh, no.
I'll email
No.
Steve and see if he wants to do it.
Yeah,
Steve
if he
wouldn't
wants to
even
jump
respond
in
to me when I told him.
And take that.
From
That
Minnesota,
sounds
is he in
good.
Minnesota?
Yes, he went to Minnesota, well, they're having winter.
You know, if the 2-pager's going out to people, we might just put Anchorage Municipal Code 1.15.070 on the top of that, so that
Sure.
they're
Just so
Yeah,
that-
no, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay. I don't think we need to see this again. You're gonna make those corrections?
I'll make those corrections.
Okay, and then we
I
just
don't-
send it to Lisa and get it out. And then the internal document's internal anyway, so that, that can be done.
Do you, since we're in this process and have 10 minutes, do you want to look at the form to see if it's what you want it to be? Because I
Have
can
we-
work on this
have
form.
we edited that one recently?
Not this one, not the notice of potential violation.
Yes,
We
I
did
know, wait.
extensively the notice of intent.
Sure, is it in here?
It's
think
in the
the
back of your
very
book,
last thing.
and it's the second to the last. I think the advisory is the last one, and it's the second to the last.
Have we had?
Oh, all the way to
problems
the
with
back
that
of your
one?
book, all the way
Yeah,
to
the
the back.
last section of the book. And then
Forms. Because Terry was mentioning what we wanted from the person filing.
I like these 5-minute meetings. They're always 5 minutes. Okay, so this is.
So it does mention confidentiality, which was what Bill had brought up. And then it does say, I am requesting your determination regarding a possible violation of, and it's got these categories, I don't know if those are all the ones are the right ones. And it does say this may constitute a violation of the ethics code because, and that's point 2. The only thing lacking is a point 3 where perhaps we should prompt them to, if you have any documentary or testimonial evidence that you would like to provide, blah, 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 blah. Attach.
Yeah, maybe that we would like, because some language saying,
Please attach supporting.
explain
Right.
in detail,
Yeah.
attach any relevant documents
Mhm.
or lists of individuals that you think the board should talk to.
Well, the other
Feel
thing.
free to attach if necessary. I mean, because I think what happens is that people feel like, okay,
This is
I'm
the
limited
only
to this
space.
box,
Yeah.
and so the most, I'm going to give you 3 sentences maybe as to what has happened here. With a little prompt saying, we're sort of expecting you to.
And maybe
give
I
us
could
a bit of
even
information.
number these. This is number 1 we want from you. This is number 2 we want from you. And this list is number 3 we want from you.
Mhm.
So that they're responding, because I think I would glaze over this a little bit if I were filling it out.
And in a number 1, I'm looking at that, they're not limited to just those 4
I was
bullets.
just gonna say.
Right. And I don't know why
And I'm
these are
wondering- So I'm
this
wondering
way.
if we shouldn't just have an other,
Why?
fill in the blank, or
Well,
you're
why
not gonna know
are
the
they
code
in here
section.
at all?
I don't know.
I mean, why can't, if they find a violation of the code, they should know where it is in the code that, they should have
Okay.
some idea of what's being violated. Why even direct them to these 4 sections at all?
Okay.
I mean, I don't know, and why other? Because then what happens is they just end up putting one that fits the best. Is it
Instead of
like
knowing
this one?
exactly which one they want.
Right. Now, I suppose these are the main categories.
I think that's it. If you look at
But
the-
yeah, I mean, is there anything else?
Just looking at the table of contents, I'm not sure there's any other way to violate the code other than by those 4 things.
Okay.
The breaching the confidentiality of
Mhm.
70 isn't mentioned in those 4 things, so maybe that's the only.
Under the affirmation at the bottom there, the second sentence, I think, because this is an affirmation, rather than having the second sentence as a statement, I'd say, in addition to any penalty or punishment that may apply, I understand that the submission of a false statement. Or something, rather than.
Oh, yes.
And it's punishable by by your taxes
Appointment
being
to the board.
doubled, or appointment to the board.
Mm-hmm.
You have to sell the Board of Equalization.
Well, maybe an explanation of what Bill said under that box. How to though. Because it seems kind of clear and necessary once Bill said, well, these are the only ways you can violate the code. And then something to clarify, you know, we keep getting these ones in here that go, well, it was 1.25, and it's like, no, we're just talking about the code of ethics.
Mhm.
And because right off the bat, we boot
You're
those
right.
ones out.
I see. Yeah, no, that's true. They could. Yeah, they focus then on the code.
Should there be a statement, violations of these sections of the code or the jurisdiction of blah, 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 only?
5 minutes, huh, Dee? You came back, you moved and says, I'll come back with 5 minutes left to go.
That's right.
I'll try it out. I'll try out an explanation and see
Okay.
about jurisdiction.
Also try out a sentence about supplemental. Supplementary. If-
Oh,
if-
She's got
if-
that on there.
Whatever. Okay.
Supplement.
Yeah, anything in support. Yeah.
Okay.
Is it really true that submitting a false statement is a violation of 100?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true.
Let's check it out. This form has never been tested by this board.
100 is just our
Yeah.
general sanction authority.
I don't even have it. 150, 100?
I guess it's sort of obliquely referenced actually in A8. It says, well, referring to a court or administrative hearing officer finding a person guilty of knowingly violating any provision or furnishing false, misleading, or incomplete information to the board with an intent to mislead. Sort of implies it's not supposed to be there.
Oh, yeah, that was something else about our process of whether we want to swear
Question mark
people
there.
in.
Well, we did. Oh, I noticed that on there. I thought that was good.
Is it
Had
in
we-
here? I meant to put
yeah,
it in here.
I put
Because
it.
sometimes
I saw
we
a
do,
line
and
about
then
that.
sometimes we don't. And so if we do,
Oh.
one of you lawyer types need to find an oath to administer. The last time we did it, I made one up.
Oh, for testimony?
Mm-hmm.
No, I thought I saw it in here. And I thought it was. I was going to star it actually. What was that?
Yeah, it does say. in there that the
It does,
testimony
doesn't it?
is given sworn, yeah.
Where is it? I thought I saw it.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
little
right.
witnesses should be sworn in.
Yeah.
So does that mean if we don't swear them in and they lie to us, it doesn't count?
Can't punish them. It counts.
Yeah,
Can't do
it
it
just means
about
they
it.
don't go to hell. So what did we decide about the form? We're gonna add a little,
Mhm.
a nudge to.
Mhm. Add some documentation.
I'll do
yeah,
some-
I think it's the code language is what, to cite. Identify any documentary or testimonial evidence the person filing believes is in support of the notice of potential violation, so. Cite
Okay.
witnesses or documents that you believe may be, you know.
Yeah,
in
water
support
that
of
down.
your notice.
Okay.
And we're
And
gonna
then
leave
some sort of, and attach as necessary, I think that's sort of like.
Well, that's the only
with
4 that you
field
can file one, I don't have any
I
trouble
guess
with.
leave the box here, huh?
Yeah.
Because we don't want them citing some provision that doesn't make sense to us.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I wonder, I mean, like, could you
Yeah.
violate other sections of the
Right.
code, though, I mean?
I just hate to pitch.
Like, so I just dug through, like, real quick, like, in
Yeah.
050, there's regulations about when the mayor can remove someone from the Board of Ethics. Now, if they remove someone from the Board of Ethics in violation of that section of the code, could someone file an ethics violation?
Yeah, do you want to put an other?
Yeah, I think that's another.
I hate
so.
to box people in, you know?
Yeah, right, I mean. Look, I think as long as it's from 1.15, maybe you
Yeah.
can say.
That would have to be what would be clear, and
Right,
other,
that's the
but
thing, other,
within the
but
code of
within
ethics.
1.15 of the municipal code.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, maybe even a line, I don't know, you format that. How long was this meeting going? To 1:30?
To 1:30, right?
It's 1:30. Do we have more business? Dee, did you have anything?
No.
You missed a lively discussion.
I could see.
The last thing I want to say for I would propose saying the submission of a false statement with intent to deceive the board, because you wouldn't want people to think that if they were 95% sure that they were alleging this true, that they would be on the hook for having violated the code if it ultimately
false
turned out to be
statement.
false.
You're right. Yeah, there has to be some intent there. Yeah,
Right.
no.
And that's what it says even in that one.
Right.
And so don't even cite that 100?
And you know, another thing, it could be maybe a violation as opposed to is. We don't know, right?
And maybe in a, and maybe in a.
That would be, that
Okay.
would, because, I don't know, it's my thought.
Okay. You guys will get a chance to see it again. So, get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Oh, I can't make that motion.
Yeah, you can, according to
Oh, I can. Well,
the
you
small
can
board
under the small
rules.
board
We're allowed to do just about whatever we
I
want.
move to adjourn.
Okay.